So I gotta admit, I am genuinely blown away by the announcement CDPR made earlier today. Today was CD Projekt Red's strategy update, and during this they shared plans for really the next decade or so. This is pretty much one of the biggest updates we've ever gotten on this company, revealing new info on the future of CD Projekt Red overall, but then even more explicitly their plans for Cyberpunk, The Witcher, and even other new things. And some of these were so crazy, some of the investors were even like, wait, can you even do that? I don't know, I'm sure at least some of you have seen some of the things that have been announced around this. There's definitely a fuller picture here. There's been a ton of misconceptions, and I actually took the time to watch through all of the Q&A, all of the videos they put out, and even just the slides that were released, so you could hopefully really understand what CDPR is doing next. And one of the first things they establish are some of the internal changes that really made all of this possible. In the last strategy update, CDPR described how in 2022 they would begin development of 2 AAA games in tandem, this known as Red 2.0. And they're currently doing this. They have full-scale development of both the Cyberpunk expansion, Phantom Liberty, as well as the next Witcher game. But they actually have a lot more coming as a result of this, and more on that in a moment. A few months after they unveiled their Red 2.0 strategy, they also did announce an exclusive partnership with Epic Games, where all future titles coming from CD Projekt Red would be on Unreal Engine, and they're even developing tools for Unreal Engine specifically. They're making some of the Unreal Engine 5 tools to fit CDPR and open world content in general, which is actually pretty interesting. During some of the videos, they talk about how they're applying some of their experience creating these types of games for the past couple of decades to handcraft tools to make it easier for them in the future. So they're building the tools they know they'll need when making the next Witcher and the next Cyberpunk games. In the past, Unreal Engine has been critiqued as a relatively poor platform for open world games, and it seems like a big part of this deal with Epic Games and CDPR is actually helping to improve that and improve the engine overall. But even further, as a part of this, CDPR describes how working with Unreal Engine 5 is already streamlining their work. But then that brings us to the absolutely insane number of games CD Projekt Red just revealed and their overall timeline for these games. They're making 3 new games for the Witcher universe, and these will be the next 3 games that CDPR releases. Polaris is the codename for the Witcher Saga game that was announced earlier this year. This is currently in pre-production at CD Projekt Red, and this already has 150 developers on it. Polaris is going to be the start of a new trilogy of games, 3 games in total. Polaris will be the first one, and after Polaris releases from that date going forward, the next 2 games will come out in the next 6 years. So there's been a lot of confusion on this quote, so I just want to make it really clear here what they actually said, and that is, like, let's say Polaris comes out in 2026. From that day forward, the release date of Polaris, the next 2 games will come out within 6 years of that day. So in this hypothetical, all 3 games would be out by 2032, 6 years after the release of Polaris in 2026. Now, no concrete release years or anything like that have been created. That's just speculation on my part. I saw some people speculating that CD Projekt Red meant that the next 3 games will be out within the next 6 years, like all 3 will come out by 2028, but no, that is not the case. But in fact, it actually seems like Polaris is still a ways away. CD Projekt Red further clarified the reason they will be able to release all 3 games in a 6-year window is because a bunch of the groundwork for the entire trilogy will be done as they're making Polaris, which means it's actually going to take a bit longer. They don't give any explicit timelines, but they mention how if the 2 games after Polaris will take 3 years, Polaris is going to take more than 3 years because it's going to take more time. Development on Polaris began in early 2022, and it's going to take longer than 3 years, so it does seem relatively reasonable that we could see this game in 2026. That's why I used that number earlier. I know though, that's still a ways away. That's not all. So it seems like the Molasses Flood is also potentially in pre-production on a new Witcher game, this being codenamed Sirius. The Molasses Flood is a studio that CDPR acquired last year, and this new game they're working on, Sirius, is actually a bit of a different one. It's described as being developed for a broader audience and different from past games, as well as it's going to be multiplayer, but not mobile. They actually explicitly confirm that. And they further clarify how with this game they want to reach people that they may have not been reaching with The Witcher 3 already, such as people who watched The Witcher TV show and aren't as interested in a dark-themed game like The Witcher 3. The game currently has a team of about 60 people working on it, but this will grow, and it almost sounds like this may be a game as a service, like something that comes out and continues to get updates over time. They say how it's going to be a big game, but don't explicitly mention it being AAA. And they also say how they plan to go full behind it when it launches, and not to expect a story game like The Witcher 3. And if you look at the types of games the Molasses Flood has developed in the past, it definitely seems like this has a pretty good chance at being pretty different from what we've seen from CDPR in the past. And I'm honestly having a hard time imagining what exactly this is going to be. After listening to them speak about Sirius for a little while, especially during the Q&A, it almost sounds like it's going to be a more multiplayer-focused game that will receive content over time, and really be nothing like a traditional Witcher experience at all. So if you love The Witcher, you may not love this game, despite it being set in the same universe. But when it comes to being a multiplayer-focused game, or even just being a game as a service, that's not explicitly confirmed, that's just my speculation based off what they said. It'll be different, it won't be like a regular Witcher game, and it will be multiplayer, but we don't know if that'll be the core focus of it. But then, in a bit of a plot twist, there's yet another AAA Witcher RPG coming, but not from CD Projekt Red at all, and instead, they actually are outsourcing or hiring a third-party studio to make this one. This game is going to be codenamed Canis Majoris. It's not going to be a part of this new Witcher trilogy, it's just going to be a standalone Witcher AAA RPG, and reportedly the team behind this one are actually consisting of former devs of The Witcher. So it seems like there's devs that left CDPR, are working at a new studio now, and these are the people that are working on this game. And there's actually a bit of intrigue around this one because they say that 2 of the Witcher games are in pre-production, and just based off these slides, we could see that the Molasses Flood Witcher game is in pre-production. The CDPR Witcher game, Polaris, is also in pre-production. So this third-party AAA RPG is not in pre-production. They actually mention later on during the investor Q&A that they're going to have more to share on this very soon, and they explicitly use those words. So does that mean this game's actually like several years into development or in full production and we could play it in the next couple of years? Or alternatively, does it mean that it's literally not even in pre-production yet? Like it's just in the conceptual phase and hasn't even gotten to pre-production yet? I actually think it may be the latter, and I'll explain a bit more as we get into the timeline here. And to make everything a bit more clear as we move forward, to establish a bit of a timeline, they explicitly mention again that the next 3 games will be those 3, the next 3 Witcher games. So the next releases are Polaris, Sirius, and Canis Majoris, which means that since they also announced a totally new Cyberpunk sequel, that is going to be at least 4 or 5 years away, because they said that Polaris is going to take over 3 years, and very likely 4 years at least, and if all of these games are coming out before the next Cyberpunk game, the Cyberpunk game's pretty far away. They have to release 3 new games before their internal roadmap slates them to have that one come out. But this hypothetically could also mean we get 3 new Witcher games in the next 4 or 5 years. I don't think that's impossible. Like, I think there is a realistic timeline where Canis Majoris is next, if that already is in full production. After that, this Molasses Flood game, which although not a small game, they explicitly say it's a big game, it seems like it may not be full-scale AAA. And then finally, Polaris, which will kick off the next Witcher trilogy. But of course, during this, they also revealed Project Orion, which is going to be a sequel to Cyberpunk 2077 and described as fully unleashing the potential that the universe offers, which actually could be a bit of commentary on what they had hoped to do with Cyberpunk 2077 but were not able to, perhaps being held back by one thing or another, but the sequel will not be held back at all. And to make this new Cyberpunk game a reality, they are launching a completely new studio, that with CD Projekt Red North America. The way this will work is it's going to incorporate their existing Vancouver office that is there right now, but also there's going to be a totally new office opening in Boston, actually next to the Molasses Flood. And to be clear here, because even some of the investors had their own confusions about this, the Molasses Flood is not working on the new Cyberpunk game. It's going to remain its own thing. CD Projekt Red are just literally opening up another office next door to the Molasses Flood, and that'll be CD Projekt Red Boston and a part of CD Projekt Red North America. And CD Projekt Red North America is going to be solely focused on Orion, solely focused on the next Cyberpunk game. Later on in the Q&A, somebody asked how large the studio will be, and they mentioned a comparable size to the dev team of Cyberpunk 2077, so about 350 to 400 developers. So as long as I am understanding everything correctly, it seems like CDPR will be growing by a considerable amount and have teams separately working on all of these Witcher projects. So almost like a CD Projekt Red EU working on The Witcher, and then separately and a similar sized CD Projekt Red North America working on Cyberpunk. They don't really give concrete team sizes or how much larger they think they'll get overall, but it seems plausible that we could have 2 300 to 400 person studios working on these 2 separate games. Likely with a bunch of intermingling in between, different people working on different things, but just to simplify it, a ton of people working on our favorite franchises at the same time. Although some people from CD CDPR EU will be moving over, as we've already seen some members like Pal Sasko mention on Twitter that he's going to be moving over to Boston to help build out this new studio and be a part of CD Projekt Red NA. And although this is all incredibly exciting, it's also still a ways away. Work on Orion hasn't even begun yet. They confirmed that during the Q&A. People will seemingly move over or just start working on Orion once Phantom Liberty releases, but if you were somebody who was holding out hope for a second expansion or signed a petition or anything like that, it just doesn't seem like that's happening. There are some concerns that CD Projekt Red was moving away from the Cyberpunk IP, but it actually kind of seems like it's the opposite, in that they are literally developing an entire second studio internally to work on Cyberpunk full time. They're not making a second expansion because they're literally making another game. And one of the biggest takeaways I had from all this is it seems like there could be a really short gap between future titles from CD Projekt Red. Like if you just look at all of these games they announced, and even that whole plan of having all 3 Witcher games out in a 6-year span, like even if that's still 5 years away, the next Cyberpunk game would be releasing in that 6-year span, almost definitely, because I doubt the next Cyberpunk game is going to take 11 years to make. But either way, that could mean, like, let's say 2026, we get the Witcher Polaris project. Next year, we get an expansion for it. The next year, we get the next Cyberpunk game. The next year, we literally get another new Witcher game. The next year, we get a Cyberpunk expand, and so on and so forth. And that's why I really think that this AAA RPG in the Witcher universe coming from a third-party studio is sooner than we think, because they do have this gap now to fill in the next 4 to 5 years, and it would make a lot of sense to outsource something to have it released during that time period. And at the same time, you also have this Molasses Flood project, which will also likely fill that gap. And it's hard to not draw this parallel of CD Projekt Red is literally doing what everyone hopes Bethesda would do, opening up a second studio dedicated just to Cyberpunk while they work on The Witcher, hiring other companies to keep their IPs active as they work on the bigger projects, and even just releasing a ton of Witcher games in rapid succession. So oddly enough, the two things to get zero news during all of this are actually the next two things that are coming out. Cyberpunk 2077's expansion got no updates during this. We just got a reassurance that it is coming at some point in 2023, and even that it's in the final production phase with 350 devs working on it. The Witcher 3 Next Gen also got no new updates despite it coming out at some point later this year. Although even all of that isn't everything, as CDPR also revealed they're working on a totally new IP, and their first fully new IP, codenamed Hadar. This is super early on. Work began in 2021, but describe how they're still at the concept phases of building the setting. There's not even any game development happening yet. But even further, there's going to be some content plan changes going forward with all of these new titles. CDPR announced concrete multiplayer plans for their future titles. It seems like this may be a core part of their Molasses Flood project, but even further, something coming to the next Witcher and Cyberpunk games. If you remember, this is actually a plan they had with Cyberpunk 2077, but it was scrapped early on. But now with the move to Unreal Engine 5, they describe multiplayer being an integral part of the engine and coming to future titles. And their wording here seemingly was a bit careful. They say how it would be better to play with another person and how the games will be story RPGs first and foremost. So it doesn't seem like these are multiplayer games at their heart, but rather it's going to be a game with multiplayer. But at the same time, I don't think there's much point in speculating how multiplayer will look in future titles, because I don't even think CDPR knows. Some of these games haven't even started pre-production, so they probably don't even know how the multiplayer mode will work. But that is still not all. They show off this franchise flywheel, which is going to represent their strategy to turn video games into a bunch of spin-off things like comics, TV shows, merchandise, and even mobile games. The idea being that everything on the flywheel will benefit everything else on the flywheel. They release a Cyberpunk video game, which makes the board game even more popular. Later, they release a Cyberpunk show, which makes the board game and the video game even more popular, as well as making a bunch of money in its own right. And this is not just some distant pipe dream, but something that is already happening. They mentioned new toy stuff being worked on and how they are already working on a major project with a completely external team, and we expect to have a few carefully selected more in the years to come. Although what that project is exactly isn't clear, but seemingly something on this flywheel outside of a video game, with one of the biggest standouts, especially in this market, being the mobile games. They will work with external teams to create new mobile games around their existing franchises in the future. They describe wanting to do justice by their brand. This is likely a caution against super aggressive monetization in these games, but we are really just going to have to wait and see what the new Witcher and Cyberpunk mobile games will look like. And to be clear, none of the projects announced during this video are on mobile. And overall, I found this update to be incredibly exciting if you're a fan of CD Projekt Red. Obviously, Witcher fans got the most news and will definitely be eating good for a while, but it seems like CDPR is genuinely committed to Cyberpunk. There being only one expansion made a lot of people worried, but I think this shows they are incredibly committed to the game in the future, and while I could be seeing a lot of Cyberpunk content in the future. And I wouldn't be shocked if we see major releases from CD Projekt Red basically every year, whether that be a new game, a new TV show, a new expansion, a new mobile game, outsourced games, and other things all added within. They just seem like they're going to be incredibly busy going forward. With all that said, hopefully this was a good summation of all of the new things announced and really just clarity on what is actually going on here. With that in mind though, hopefully you guys found this one informative. As always, again, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.